Tomorrow is July the 4th. Today is the 3rd. But it was yesterday when the real fireworks took place inside and outside of the courtroom as the jury reached a verdict in the Diddy case. Not guilty on RICO, and also the other most serious offense that carried a minimum sentence of 15 years in prison. If Diddy would have been convicted on the RICO charge, that carried up to life. There's been a lot of reaction since this verdict was reached. We're going to look at that here today and also talk about all things in relation to what comes next for Diddy now that he's beaten the most serious of charges against him. And also a bit of a riddle. If Kid Cudi was in a band, what band would he be in? That's right, the Chainsmokers. Buddy was hitting that Newport 1000, walking to and fro the courtroom, testifying against Diddy, one of the biggest federal witnesses in relation to that RICO charge. I wonder what his reaction was seeing this verdict of Diddy. Buddy's probably smoked a carton since yesterday. But let's go ahead and get into this and first start with taking a look at some of the reaction that's been captured since this verdict was reached yesterday. And I think this is a great place to start right here. What does that shirt say Buddy is holding? A Frico is not RICO.
Hold that up for me and kind of explain why you're giving those out, what made you want to do that.
Honestly, the shirt is self-explanatory, right? So he's in here for doing this, right? But they're trying to make you think that he's in there for this. A Frico is not a RICO. What you're doing in your own bedroom is not against the law, right? He's making porn tapes with his girlfriend, consenting porn.
Consenting corn tapes. All right, let me just jump in right here. I think that the shirt is very catchy. I don't need to watch this entire video. There we go. That's all we need right there. A Frico is not RICO. You're absolutely right. Though it is a catchy shirt, I don't think that it necessarily...
Why you're giving those out, what made you want to do that.
I didn't tell you to start playing again. A Frico is not RICO. Hey, it's a very catchy slogan right there, but the freak-offs, I think, were different from the RICO case that the federal prosecution was trying to see Diddy get convicted of. And real quick, before we go any further, let's take a moment and talk about that federal prosecutor, Maureen Comey, who I didn't even realize was the daughter of the former FBI director, James Comey. Headline that reads, former FBI director James Comey's daughter, Maureen, suffers high-profile loss as prosecutor in Diddy Trial. I thought about this specifically last night. What is next for Maureen Comey as a federal prosecutor? Entrusted to try probably one of the most high-profile cases of her career, in which she was not able to close the deal on. And I'm going to be honest, my personal opinion, I don't believe that the prosecution laid enough evidence and groundwork for a conviction of RICO. I'm not really going to touch the other charge that he beat, given the sensitive nature of how people feel in relation to that. I do think it's interesting that he beat that charge, but was convicted of two lesser charges, transportation to engage in prostitution, which kind of sounds similar to the charge that he beat that carried a minimum 15-year sentence. The RICO charge and that particular charge that he beat were the two biggest charges that he needed to beat. Getting convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution ×2 definitely has to feel like a win for the defense. The prosecution, on the other hand, I wonder what's next for this woman. Will they give her another crack at high-profile major cases? Personally, I don't think that they do. But let's get back to a little reaction of the verdict. This is coming from CNN right here. What they talking about?
I kid you not. People are pouring baby oil on one another outside this courthouse. Baby oil having a very big play in the freak-offs we heard about. I kid you not. People are pouring baby oil on one another outside this courthouse. Baby oil.
Where was this energy during the trial? You know, it's crazy for me to think, and maybe I just missed it. Did Diddy receive this amount of support throughout this trial? Without really knowing, I don't think that he would have. But beating those two charges, now all of a sudden people are coming out the woodwork, kind of jumping on the Diddy bandwagon to a certain degree. Now, you can't really get too close to this guy because he's still seen as the worst of the worst. But I mean, take a look at this right here. Diddy fans removed by riot police. That's baby oil right there. And everybody's got their phone out. Spraying each other with baby oil. Looks like they're having a freak off right in front of the courthouse. This is diabolical to me.
Nancy Grace, welcome back to TMZ Live. We know you were watching. Your reaction the moment that the verdict came down.
Well, I'm curious as to how you think I would have reacted, but I can tell you I'm shattered. I'm devastated. I feel like I got kicked in the stomach and in the teeth, and I'm sure that makes all of Sean Combs, a.k.a. Diddy's followers, happy. But I'd like to point out that there are other people much more devastated than I am. That would be his victims. They're devastated. And dare I speak for victims all across the country, they're devastated because it does show that there is rich man's justice, which is very different from what I believe justice is supposed to be.
Let me stop you right there. What do you think justice is supposed to be? We're calling this Diddy verdict rich man's justice. Shout out to Nancy Grace. I've got a lot of respect for her. She definitely was all over this case, doing segments with Tootsie Roll candies in her hand just for added emphasis. I remember hearing somebody who testified saying that Diddy was shriveled up like a Tootsie Roll. Diabolical. Diddy had a high-paid lawyer, but he had a jury. And we're going to talk about juries in federal cases in just a little bit in this video. It was the jury that reached the verdict not guilty on those two massive charges that he beat. They said in that TMZ segment right there that he skated on those charges. I want to mention this real quick. I remember during the deliberation, before the verdict was reached, there was news being reported. The jury has reached a partial verdict. They had come to a verdict on 4 of the 5 offenses, but they couldn't reach a verdict on the RICO case. They sent word back out into the courtroom to the judge saying that they couldn't reach a verdict. And the judge's orders back to them, their instructions back to the jury was try harder. When the news was being reported that the jury had come to a verdict on 4 of the 5 charges, I'm sure everybody was thinking, oh yeah, they found him guilty on all 4 of these charges so far, and we're just waiting on the RICO. I find it strange that a judge is allowed or can, and I'm sure that they can, especially in a federal case, tell a jury, I don't care if you can't reach a verdict, reach a verdict. Maybe the judge was hoping that he would be found guilty on all of these charges. And I'm not trying to put any type of, words in the judge's mouth here. It just really makes me wonder. Let's just say he would have been found guilty on everything. Could it have been cause for appeal? Just the judge saying, try harder. I don't care if you can't reach a verdict. Go reach a verdict. And then also, I think to myself, because of the fact that this man was only convicted of the 2 least charges that he was charged with, of course the prosecution is going to want to see this guy get the utmost, the maximum sentence for transportation to engage in prostitution is 10 years each. The prosecution is going to want to see Diddy receive the max sentence. But wouldn't that be seen as a little bit retaliatorial? You want this man to receive the max because you couldn't get him convicted on all the charges that you wanted him convicted of? Whatever happened to being tried amongst a jury of your peers? Are we not going to respect the jury's decision here? And let me also say this. I do not want this to come across Joe Team Diddy. I am addressing this from the middle of the road. I know that there are a lot of people who believe that Diddy should be doing life. I'm not here to argue that. I'm simply here talking about the fact that the jury reached the verdict that the jury reached and what is going to come next from that. I want to take a look at one more video right here. This one is as the family was leaving from the courthouse. Diddy about to be a free man. The world is a crazy place. And we're going to have, there's his mother right there. I don't know who those folks are right there. There's his daughters right there. And then there's his son, who's almost a spitting image of him. Look at him, dapping him up right there. People are chanting bad boy. Chanting bad boy. Look at this. Yeah, man, they're feeling like they got the W up in the courtroom right there. How crazy would it be if Diddy ended up with 20 years? The max that he could face for sentencing. But I don't personally believe that that is going to happen because there's guidelines that they have to follow up inside of that courtroom. And those guidelines are there for a reason. And this is a very important reason, the Diddy case especially. There is a lot of high caliber emotion coming from the opposition and the prosecution. And if they could have their way, if those sentencing guidelines weren't there, just imagine the amount of time that they would be asked. They would be asking for 20 years. 2 decades in prison. A guy who doesn't even have a criminal record prior to this situation, or not one really. Federal sentencing guidelines are different from state sentencing guidelines. And in the state system, those guidelines differ from state to state. And the feds and a Fed case, they are the same across the board. Everybody starts off at 0. Being a defendant, being a person found guilty with no prior criminal record. But everything adds to those points that add up on that sentencing guideline. And the more points you have, the more time a person could and oftentimes would be sentenced to. He now faces up to 20 years in prison, but sentencing guidelines suggest a much shorter term. Prosecutors are pushing for a sentence of 4 to 5 years, which in the federal system, they sentence you in months. So that would be 51 to 63 months. But defense attorneys are arguing for a lighter sentence of 21 to 27 months, around 2 years. Also, Diddy has already been locked up now for 9 months. And that will definitely be credited toward any time that he is sentenced to. Sentencing is scheduled for October the 3rd, 10 a.m. And he was just denied bail, which is crazy to think. How could a guy even ask for bail after being found guilty? Well, in Diddy's case, and any cases that may be similar, you can have bail all the way up until the day of sentencing, if you're granted bail. Obviously, Diddy wasn't granted bail from the jump because of the severity of the charges that he was charged with. RICO, carrying a life sentence. Diddy being what was referred to as a flight risk, a threat, but he beat those most serious charges. Spanked them, dare I say. No Diddy. Think about that statement right there, no Diddy. Is that still going to hold the same weight? Probably and absolutely, right? But yeah, because he beat those most serious charges, he had the right to be able to ask for bail again. Given the fact that he's only facing, what, at most 5 years? He's already been locked up for 1. But the more logical rationale would be that he would receive something like a 2-year prison sentence given how many points he has and a lack thereof criminal record. But he was still denied bail, which I think is unbelievable. And again, I am not Team Diddy here. Prosecutors argued Combs is a flight risk. Where is he going to fly off to? Buddy has absolutely no reason to run now. Imagine sitting in a jail facing a life sentence. And then just like that, all of a sudden, the most that you're probably facing, they say, is 4 to 5 years. I got a feeling the prosecution may try to argue for more than that, but probably they're not going to be able to because that could be seen as egregious. I don't know, just my opinion. The fact that he was still denied bail and called a flight risk, I think, is ridiculous. He has no reason to run. They also say that he's a threat to the victims and the community. You think if that guy got the opportunity to get out, he would be trying to do anything to jeopardize that? I personally don't know. Maybe he's crazy enough to do something like that. We all heard what Kid Cudi testified to. And you know, you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't in the bail situation. You give him the bail, he's out. You don't give him the bail, it's only more time added up in terms of time served that's going to be deducted from whatever time you sentence him to. In fact, by not giving him bail, you're ensuring he's going to be out even sooner. But just because he beat these charges that he did yesterday definitely doesn't mean that he's out of the woods just yet. He's still got multiple civil lawsuits, and there could also be the possibility of the prosecution maybe trying to drum up some new charges. But they can't go after him for RICO, and they can't go after him for that other massive charge, because that would be double jeopardy. I want to take a little bit of time and talk about the jury here. I remember during the initial phases of deliberation, they had sent word back saying that they were having a problem with juror number 12 or one particular juror. I can't remember what it was. I wonder what that problem was. I'm not sure if any light has been shed on that situation just yet, but you got to know that there will be a Netflix documentary or some sort of documentary coming out, and they're going to spill the beans on everything that went into deliberations between the jurors. I wonder what that problem was, though. Was it a juror who said, hey, look, this guy is guilty of everything and I don't want to hear anything that any of you have to say. I want him guilty on all 5 charges. And maybe the other juror is like, hey, look, we got to kind of ping pong. We got to table this for discussion. Or maybe it was vice versa. This guy is innocent of everything. The prosecution did a piss poor job up in the courtroom. They spent too much time talking about baby oil. Maybe it was like that. But when it comes to a jury for a federal criminal case, there are some major differences between a state jury. Things such as in the state system, and again, this could differ from state to state. Some states may not require a jury's decision and verdict to be unanimous. It may just need to be a majority vote. But in the federal system, it has to be a unanimous vote. So thinking about that, all 12 jurors voted not guilty for racketeering and that other charge. Also, when it comes to selecting a jury for a federal case, jurors are selected from a much more vast pool of jurors. They could come from essentially all over the place. Whereas in a state case, they're mostly localized to that area, that county, that city, that locale. The biggest difference, especially in relation to the Diddy case, is the fact that in a federal criminal case with a jury, the jury does not recommend sentencing. The jury's job is to simply decide guilt or innocence, which I think is actually a big deal in Diddy's case. No matter how you look at it, it could either be a very good thing that the jury doesn't get the opportunity to deliberate and recommend sentencing, or it could be a bad thing. In state criminal cases with juries, and again, this differs from state to state, but there's some states where the jury actually not only determines guilt or innocence, but they also determine a recommendation for sentencing. In the federal system, the jury is done as soon as they reach their verdict. We don't need you anymore. You're out of here. I wonder how the judge feels about the verdict that the jury reached. One thing that I don't know, and maybe it's the same as the state system, but in the federal system, does a defendant have the choice of a jury trial versus a bench trial, meaning that you're tried solely in front of a judge? I got to imagine they have that right to make the decision how they want to be tried. And of course, you got to know your chances are always better with a jury. That's more people, more opportunities. It's just like playing roulette. More chances to sway things your way, because those are 12 opinions you've got to rely on. And that's a tall task for a prosecutor. So Diddy is going to be sentenced by this judge that oversaw this entire case on October the 3rd at 10 a.m. What will this judge decide in terms of sentence imposed and essentially Diddy's fate? You know, a judge has the ability to exceed sentencing guidelines. There's got to be some rationale behind that. And you would hope that rationale doesn't come across as any type of retaliatory or personal bias in the situation, personal investment. But there could always be a slim chance of that, I would think. Of course, the defense is going to argue for the least, based on merit, based on point systems, based on lack of criminal history. How is the prosecution going to argue this without them also looking retaliatorial and personal biasness invested here? We're arguing for the max, Your Honor, because we couldn't convict him on the other charges. I'm going to be very curious to watch how these final arguments go, especially on the prosecution side. This was a case that I really wanted to cover more but didn't get the opportunity to do so given the fact that we were so invested here with the New Orleans escape and so many other jail and prison escapes that were taking place during this escape season. It's crazy to know that alongside all that we shared here, this massive high-profile case was taking place at the same time. And I tried to follow this as much as I was able to do so. And I'm sure many of you did as well. I definitely wanted to share with you my thoughts and opinions on this situation and approach this from as neutral and as middle of the ground as I possibly could. And I hope I was able to showcase that for you here today. I also hope you found some interest in this. And if you did so, please leave a like and a comment letting me know exactly what you think. How much time do you think Diddy is going to receive? Do you think that he should have received a bail? Or better yet, do you think that he should have been found guilty on RICO and that other charge? Let us know down in the comments how you feel. And if you find yourself new here on After Prison Show enjoying this content but not yet subscribed, please consider doing so and turning on bell notifications so that you never miss an upload from us. It would greatly be appreciated and go a long ways to helping to support this channel. As always, until next time, enjoy life, the free world, never take a moment for granted, and make the most of every day. Peace!